Hope everyone got lunch. I know it was a madhouse out there. So thanks for coming to this session on the next generation of open data platforms. So our speaker today is Jerry Johnston, who is I wrote this down, he's the Director of Information Technology and Management at the Department of Interior. And before he gets up here, I want to explain a little bit about what we mean when we say next generation open data platforms in the context of this session. All sorts of open data platforms and catalogs are being run today and are being run on AWS. And what we're starting to see over time is an evolution from data platforms where you've got a catalog, you put a bunch of data up on the web, people can access it there, it's great. You might have sort of like a hodgepodge of data sets from various agencies or various groups. That's interesting and it's great and it's a step in the right direction. So what's beyond that is creating open data platforms in the cloud that are truly collaborative and service also more focused audiences. And so Jerry's here to talk about how the Department of Interior is really being innovative and showing some leadership in creating a shared service that can be used by everybody who works throughout the federal government and in other levels of government with geospatial data, but is also being collaboratively built by those same parties. So with that, let's introduce Jerry Johnston from the Department of Interior. Thank you.
Thanks, Jed, and good afternoon, everybody. Got it. So Jed took all my talking points, but I'll go through a few of them and kind of elaborate a little bit on work that we're doing. The Department of the Interior leads an initiative called the Geospatial Platform, but it's work that we do that's on behalf of all of the member agencies of the Federal Geographic Data Committee. So this has been ongoing for several years, and as Jed mentioned, I think concurrent with the work that we've been doing in the geospatial community, there's been this huge, revolution in technology and kind of how we make data available, how we make data more discoverable and more useful for our partners. So I'm going to talk about how the work that we're doing on the site geoplatform.gov is evolving along with that into what I think is the beginning of a next generation data platform. So how many people have heard of the term National Spatial Data Infrastructure, the NSDI? A few, that's pretty good. Okay, so this idea is old. It's been around for a long time, since the 80s and early 90s, this notion that we should, in the spatial data realm, make sure that whenever a government agency, whenever somebody in the public sector collects and maintains a digital data set with spatial data, that it should be available to everybody. It should be out there, and it was likened early on to the highway system. This is just data that's out there to fuel good things. A real early mover in what's now the larger open data movement, across government has been, the geospatial community and the work that we've done under the umbrella of the Federal Geographic Data Committee. So it was established in 1994 officially by an executive order signed by President Clinton, and I won't go into all the details. But a couple things I want to emphasize. In addition to making data available, this was really about cost in part too. So there's this idea, some of it true, that a lot of data was being collected duplicatively across the country. So a state would go out and fly something, and then maybe a federal agency would fly the same place, weeks or months later. So a big part of what the NSDI is about is trying to make sure that that data acquisition is coordinated and that people are working together, across the nation in all levels of government in terms of how it is that we work together to build these national data sets that might be stitched together from the contributions of a lot of partners across the country. So that's something that we'll talk about a little bit as we move forward here, and some new things that we're doing in that regard. What the executive order really resulted in, though, from the standpoint of the federal government, was the creation of the first really large open source, open data, catalog for government information, and that was called Geospatial One Stop. Geospatial One Stop evolved, created standards for metadata and other things that you're all very familiar with now, back in the early 90s, and started to make its data to create ways for the government to make its data available to citizens and to each other for sharing. As time has gone on, Geospatial One Stop was moved into data.gov. As I mentioned, the larger, kind of government open data movement happened along the way as well. But the long and the short of it is we've now got hundreds of thousands of data sets that are registered in these catalogs and tools. So there's this question of now what? So we've got, I think if you look today, maybe there's 180,000 things that are geospatial in the data.gov catalog. Finding them can be a bit of a challenge. Getting access to it can be a challenge. Understanding what it is that you're trying to get at, that you're looking at can be a challenge. There are a whole bunch of things that now users are encountering when trying to find and access what it is in that large ecosystem of content. But the bigger thing is kind of, so what? So we've created these huge catalogs, as Jed mentioned. That's been a lot of the work that's gone on to date in our community, is creating catalogs to make access available. If you go and start doing searches today in data.gov and in geoplatform.gov, which I'll talk about, we're a search partner of the data.gov infrastructure, what you'll see is a lot of data sets, a lot of metadata that results in maybe there's a download, maybe there's an FTP site. Sometimes you have to call somebody. Some of the metadata records are so old, they say they're available on 9mm tape or something great like that you have to call the agency and get access to. So we need to move beyond catalogs, and how is it that we really make more content available? And the cloud is a huge enabler to make data not only discoverable, but immediately accessible, and that's work that we're trying to do in the FGDC now. Moreover, one of the things that's happened since the creation of the idea of the National Spatial Data Infrastructure in the United States is that the role of government has changed a lot in terms of how we participate, how we're a member of this larger geospatial content ecosystem of sorts. In 1994, the government was by far and away the country's biggest producer of geospatial data. The Census Bureau, others, created the Tiger data, huge geospatial data sets, Landsat. I know there was a session earlier where that was touched on as well. And that continues today, but the difference is a lot of big private sector companies are in this space too. State governments are collecting more and more data than they ever have and making it available. The federal government is now just one part of this bigger ecosystem. So that's been a big change in our space too, is trying to understand what our role is in implementing this idea of the National Spatial Data Infrastructure as the players have changed, as time has gone on. One other thing that I'll note is that in 1994, in the early 90s, geospatial was really kind of a niche thing. You had the guy in the basement with a mini computer and a big format plotter that was a specialist. This was somebody who was really trained to make maps. This is something we do now every day. All of you, most of you, probably used Google Maps or something to get here, like that. The technology has become ubiquitous, and that's made the federal government look at its role in this ecosystem as well to think about how we need to change. I'd also add that we have a number of challenges. So in a couple of years ago, the FGDC took a few steps back and started to talk about what it is we're going to do differently, given all this change in our sector, given the change in technology that's available to us today, in making bringing some of these ideas to fruition. One of the things that we all noted was the catalog experience, the search experience, is very person versus machine. There's not much collaboration. You go, you do a search, you get your results back, maybe you do something with that. We didn't have mechanisms in the community to be able to easily share that back, get suggestions, get help from the crowd. How is it that people can come together and work on a map together, work on an analysis together, build a data set together, and those kinds of things. So we wanted to take advantage of building more collaborative technologies as well, where people can do these things together in groups. Making sure it works when you all need to. I mentioned already that when you go to some of these catalogs, you may or may not be able to get access to this data. With cloud technology, there's really no reason for that anymore. We have virtually unlimited storage, bandwidth, all these other things that we can make these data sets more available, and I'll talk about how we're doing that now in geoplatform.gov. And the last thing that I'll touch on for those who are metadata people, one of the things that we've really reflected on in the geospatial community is that 20, 30-year history of creating metadata, the reality is we created that for people to read and not for machines to read. And that's something that we're really suffering from right now as we try and automate some of the discovery and build better tools that can find data, make data available to users who are trying to solve a specific problem. The reality is that a lot of the metadata came from scientists who are trying to describe their project, and they write narratives about this, and it's not necessarily the easiest thing to crawl from a modern internet standpoint, and that's something we're working on now as well. So I mentioned this planning exercise, and I won't go into real detail on this, but this is all a part of strategic planning that the Federal Geographic Data Committee agencies started back in fiscal 2013. And at that time, we released a strategic plan for years 14 through 16 of what we were going to do about this. And we identified kind of 3 major sets of goals. And the Geospatial Platform program touches on bits and pieces of all of these different goals and is working to support them. One, and the one that I'm going to focus on the most here today, is develop capabilities for national shared services. So I'll touch on that a little bit as we go through. 2, ensuring accountability and effective development and management of our resources. This is making sure we don't waste money, making sure we're not collecting the same data set twice if we don't need to. And 3, I won't talk about this really today, but one interesting thing that came up as we engaged our stakeholders, really other levels of government, the private sector, the NGO community, as this plan was being formulated. And we were asking what the appropriate role of the federal government was to move these ideas forward, and they said, convene and lead. You know, that was something that came through a lot, that the government does have an ability to bring people together. And that's something we're taking to heart now as well and really doing a lot more of. So geoplatform.gov evolved as a part of this work. It had some earlier roots in Deepwater Horizon, so NOAA, EPA, and the different parts of the Department of the Interior. During the Deepwater spill, realized that we didn't have one government-wide place where we could publish a map. NOAA had theirs, EPA had theirs, USGS had theirs. They were all over the place. And when the media in particular, and I'll stress that in the case of Deepwater, it wasn't about operational emergency management, because we do have those capabilities. They're very well understood in the government. But it was about the media. Where can the press go to see the one map of what the government is doing, whether it's a state government or whichever federal agency that happened to be collecting it. So some of the ideas had evolved before we started some of this planning on the NSDI, but the idea of geoplatform.gov has taken off from there. As I mentioned, it does implement key parts of this. One of the key concepts that's come out of this planning is the notion of a national geospatial data asset. So of all of those 160, 170, 180, whatever thousands of data sets it is that we have in these catalogs, what are the ones that really matter? What are the ones that the agencies think are the most important and need to be available? And we're focusing on that, and I'll talk about how we're making those services available. And really, one of the other things is with the evolution of cloud technology, a big part of what we're trying to do is to take some of the IT burden off of the agencies and to do some more of this for them, or to do it in partnership. The National Spatial Data Infrastructure is predicated on service standards, and it's this idea that if you make these standards available, that everybody will be able to comply and to publish their data in ways that conform to these standards and leverage these standards. In truth, we see that some people are really good at that. They're motivated to do that. They have the budget to do that. And others aren't, for whatever reason. And what we're trying to do is just to make it easy and take away some of that pain and to rehost services where we can. We think that as this evolves, and I'm going to show you some of the different parts of it as we move through this, this is an opportunity for reducing costs of producing data, some of those duplicative things that I mentioned, making sure that people have full visibility into what everybody are doing. Making web services available for all of that nationally significant data. So we want it all to be available immediately for download. We want it all to be available over interoperable web services so people can grab it and do something with it immediately, put it on a map, do their analysis, and so on. And that's not the case today. It's a very small subset of those data sets that we have that are actually readily available in those formats. A part of that is this, and there's a slide later in the presentation about this, is really monitoring quality. So this NSDI is this network of things that are contributed by lots and lots of partners. We don't necessarily centrally keep track of how good any of them are. As I mentioned, you could read the metadata that a scientist or somebody put out there as a way of getting track of, as a way of understanding what it is. But we're starting to build monitoring tools that keep track of how available is that data, how up is it, how current is it, how complete is it, and those kind of metrics that we can compute now because of cloud computing and the availability of that kind of scale in computing, and really keep track of what we're doing across the NSDI. And I'm going to show the service monitoring as well. And lastly, I'll just touch on, and I'm going to close the presentation with this, is talking about knowledge. So how is it that we share what people learned about using this data, or how they built maps as we go forward, as a way to help people discover things? So we've really been at this in earnest for about 18 months. The project has been going on much longer than that, but the new start after the NSDI strategic plan was implemented, we've been in development for about 18 months. And a lot of the hard work behind the scenes is what we've accomplished to date. So using AWS, we've built our own software as a service and platform as a service stack that different customers are using across the federal agencies in particular right now. It's been a huge advancement in our ability to make things available. We used to be on servers in one of our own departmental data centers. Honestly, we were on borrowed servers from another project. They weren't even things that we'd stood up for the purposes of our own, our own work. But problems that we used to have about the amount of disk storage that we had, or the number of CPUs that we had on boxes, have all gone away, and our infrastructure is scaling up and down as we need it. And for the first time with the infrastructure that we have, we can actually start to realize this vision of, well, if you can't host it, we can host it for you, because we've got that environment now centrally that we can start to make things available. One of the other things that I'll note is we are trying to build a platform. A lot of the focus to date has been on geoplatform.gov, the website, as a way to come in and do search and look for data sets. If this is really going to be successful, we need to build tools that enable people to take functionality, content, tools, data that are available and advertised in geoplatform.gov and embed them into their own applications. So we're very focused on building APIs and developer tools now that can help people get access to these data and these services. And one of the important concepts that we're trying to advance with a part of this, how many of you have heard of the 5-star open link data concept Tim Berners-Lee and others have been promoting over the last several years? So a few. We think it's a really interesting paradigm that there's this way of ranking how valuable some of these data are based on in a kind of Amazon-like 5-star rating for the different products. That work has been done mostly on the internet with regards to data itself, and not data services. This is notional. We're working on, kind of socializing this in the community. This is, I think, only the first or second time that anybody's, talked about this slide in a public forum. But one of the things we want to do in the FGDC community is take this idea and start to rank how good these web services are. And to do simple, rankings like this, you get 1 star if your service is available on the web and it's proprietary or it's fee-based or things like that. And as you move up the chain and get more and more stars, you'll see make your service on the web through a public and open interface. Maybe that's 4 stars. An open source service where people can download the actual code that makes the service available as well as consume an open service might be 5 stars. Again, we want to evolve this over time, but that's one of the metrics that we want to start to provide for our users so they understand what they're getting into. How open is this service? And to work with the community to come up with those kind of qualitative and semi-quantitative measures. So what we're doing today, if you go to geoplatform.gov today, there are a number of kind of main pieces. One is the catalog. Today the catalog is very much the data.gov search experience, and I'll talk about how we're moving away from that over the next several months. But a number of the basic building blocks are there. So you can go to geoplatform.gov today. You can discover data. You can create an account, use the data that are available in geoplatform.gov to create a map. You can save that map. You can share it with, you can tweet it. You can put it on Facebook. You can embed it in your own web page. So we've got now some of these open mapping tools that are starting to get traction in the community, that people are starting to utilize, and not just be able to browse the data that they're looking for in the catalog, but actually be able to do something with it, create their own presentation of the map and save and share it and make it available. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this marketplace notion and things that we've evolved as well. So you'll see if you go to geoplatform.gov today, it just got released, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, but it's this geoplatform marketplace preview that you'll see that is this kind of social place where people can go and talk about where they're collecting data and where are your partners collecting data, and start to share that information back and forth. And as I've already touched on, we're starting to do hosting centrally for projects as well. So the first thing, the marketplace, as I mentioned, this is very new. This came out just a couple of weeks ago. In previous iterations, the basic problem being that we need to try and make sure that people aren't collecting the same data more than once, that people aren't paying for the same data more than once if they don't have to, and so on. What we've done to date, historically, frankly for 25 years, I think in that regard, is we've published in a metadata record the word planned in a field in the metadata that just says, this agency doesn't have this data set, but they're planning on going out and getting it. So you can go to data.gov today and do a search of those. You can actually get all the records that are marked as planned for acquisition and get a list, at least, of all the different data sets that agencies are interested in. But as we talked through this idea a lot in the community, somebody likened where we want to go notionally as we should have a Craigslist for geodata. Where is it that people can go who have data to sell and people who have data to buy? How do they come together, and talk about, make deals, create partnerships? So we're nowhere near as cool or as useful, as Craigslist. But this is something that we're starting to move towards, is how do you really build a marketplace for spatial data? And if you go to the site today, you'll be able to see a preview, and this is just with elevation data that are in there so far. But users can go in and mark where it is they're planning on acquiring data. They can categorize what type of data it is. In this case, since it's our elevation data set, whether it's LiDAR data or collected via radar or coastal bathymetry and other different types of elevation information. And we have a standard metadata schema that all the agencies report on, so they're able to publish their records and see where it is that other people are doing things that they might be interested in. Ultimately, we want to open this up so our private sector partners can come in and say, well, I'm going to have planes here 2 months before you tell me you want to acquire this. How is it we can work together to maybe meet in the middle somewhere and we can save the government money, from doing some of these things? Or at a minimum, how is it we can give our private sector partners a heads up of where it is we plan to be, a couple years down the road? All of us, not agency by agency, because they're having those conversations individually. So this is something that is out in preview mode now that you can take a look at. One of the other things that we've worked very hard on in geoplatform.gov today, and Jed mentioned, kind of the collaborative aspects of the work that we're doing. This was a bit of a surprise to us in the evolution of this project, but one thing we kept hearing from our stakeholders is that they wanted a part of geoplatform.gov that was theirs. They didn't want just this kind of agency-wide, government-wide, brand-neutral site. They wanted to be able to carve off their own corner of our website and mark which data sets their community was interested in, which maps their community created. Some of those are password protected, some of those are full and open available. And if you go to the site today, you'll see a number of different communities that we have available. One of the most important sets of communities we're using to implement this idea of the national geodata assets. So all the agencies who work together within these different data themes actually use geoplatform.gov as their collaborative platform and to schedule meetings, to have shared calendars, to share maps with each other, to share metadata records with each other, and all kinds of things. So the communities has been, something that, frankly, we've got more demand for these communities than we've been able to implement. There's a community today for the Department of Homeland Security that just got released about their geospatial concept of operations that includes a number of state and local government agencies that are a part of that. We're talking to the oil and gas community that's very interested in creating one. There's one in for oceans. So there are a number of other things, and we're going to start to grow those over the summer as well. So different people can have essentially geoplatform.gov/mycommunity and customize their own presentation of content there. I mentioned a little bit the capability for being able to author and share and save maps on geoplatform.gov. So we do have a map viewer. And I'll be honest that when the development team started talking about this, I groaned, because those of you who have been in the geospatial community know we've got as many map viewers as there are people in the geospatial community. There's a bazillion of them, and a lot of them are really good. So I didn't see the reason necessarily to go out and create another one. But some of the things that we're able to do, they convinced me that it was a good idea to go forward and do this. One of the things we've never been able to do in the data.gov catalog is to interactively just go through and click on layers and have them start to draw on a map and preview as they're available. So if you go to our map viewer today, you'll see a list of all the web services that are registered in data.gov, and you'll be able to drop any of them onto a map to preview. You can save it and share it with somebody else if you want. Perhaps the more important thing, and it's a little bit hard to see, is that we're also keeping track. In this example, it's a pretty simplistic measure, but of the availability of that data. So our servers are going out and pinging all the servers that have a web service registered in data.gov and trying to draw it once an hour, once every couple of hours. And we're keeping track of those metrics over time, because the user experience in sites like this is generally really, really poor. You'll go to a catalog, you'll click on a web service and expect it to draw. Nothing will happen. You get a little spinning thing on the screen. Maybe there's not even an error message that comes back. So we're trying to at least give the user a heads up. These are services that live all over the government. They're in multiple levels of government. They're not even all just federal. at least to tell people what we think of the service quality in terms of its availability and what might happen if you click on this. Some of those that are red, we haven't been able to draw them for a month, and we're giving that feedback now back to some of the partners to tell them there's a problem. This might be, maybe your metadata record is just wrong, but this might be something you want to look into. So this was our first and most rudimentary implementation of quality metrics on some of the data that are there. But other things you can do in the viewer are very similar to lots of different web map viewers. You can digitize, draw on it, save those. There's the ability to move layers up and down in the visibility order, transparency, and all those kinds of things. And you can save and share maps either just as hyperlinks, as web map objects that users can go and open in our site. You can embed them in your own website, or for those of you who are familiar with the Open Geospatial Consortium standards, you can save that as a web map context, and somebody can open it in their own software if they'd like as well. Some of that works, so when you go in and create and save a map in geoplatform.gov, there's essentially a series of galleries of those maps that gets created. You can go through and search for maps that other people have created. You can create a collection of those maps that you might want to be able to share and make available to users. And as I mentioned, you can get the source code snippets there to bring those maps and those galleries into your own sites. This is another very new feature of the platform that just came out, I think 2 weeks ago as well, just like the marketplace. And it's available now on the site to users who are registered. So you can go in and anybody can create an account on geoplatform.gov for those who are interested. But I mentioned that the previous slide that I showed with the red, yellow, green kind of service quality, that was our most rudimentary and basic implementation of service quality. We want to do something different with what I mentioned are these national geodata assets. So it's roughly 200 data sets that the FGDC agencies have voted on, and these have been named nationally significant for whatever reason. It's not necessarily about the amount of money, it's just about the importance of these data sets and how widely used they are in the community. The member agencies have each gone through and done the first year, and we're going to do these annually, a very comprehensive assessment of the life cycle, the quality of that data set. And if you look at the dashboard and you go along the top, you'll see, according to the data lifecycle management, so define requirements, inventory and evaluate, obtain the data, access the data, maintenance, and so on. They've gone through and answered a number of very detailed questions about where they're at with that data set. And you'll see if you go, there are statistics that are computed across themes, so different groups of data sets that are similar. Across agencies you can select, how is this agency doing in making these data sets available? And then you can drill through and look at the way that the agency responded to the questionnaire for any one data set in particular, or any one aspect of the survey. One of the things that you'll note, so there are numbers on here, this is 4 out of 5 and 2 or 3 out of 5. And 5 out of 5. We have a bunch of shades of green. So this wasn't like the other thing that I showed that was red, yellow, green. It's all good. It's all green. We don't want to discourage people from giving us this information, but we do want to make this data available. And there was a lot of discussion in the interagency about the fear that people have when you create a dashboard that it's going to reflect poorly on people. And we're really just trying to encourage people to tell us what the truth is so we can help, as a community and understand where our gaps are. So this is a big, release. This was a lot of work from aside from technology, across the community of people who developed those 200 data sets and make them available, all put in a ton of time to make this happen. One of the other things that we're doing is for the NGDAs with our shared infrastructure. So we've now, just this summer, are embarking on a project where we want, by sometime next calendar year, to make sure that for those 200 data sets, every single one of them is available as a high quality, highly performing web service. If agencies want to do that on their own, that's great. They can do that on their own, give us the URL to the service, and we'll publish it as a part of this. And one of the things that we'll do is monitor that service. So we're starting now for the NGDAs, not just to release this qualitative red, yellow, green in terms of its quality, but the actual data. Here's the speed of the response, here's the reliability. You can click on that and see how we measure service reliability for some of these things. This will essentially become our report card for these national geodata assets. How are we doing in making these available and really, getting use? And we're starting to measure use of these data sets as well. And that's been, a big change for us as well, where instead of just making it a report card of shame of sorts, so these agencies are doing well and these agencies are doing poorly, the notion here is we can say, look, we see this service that you have up, it's only been 70% reliable for the last 2 or 3 months. Can we help you? And that's kind of what our cloud infrastructure is able to bring to the table for us, where in the past that was an intractable problem. We didn't have the capacity to be able to stand up all of this data that we don't own centrally. All the different partner agencies own and manage these data sets. But now we have the shared infrastructure in place, and we're having discussions with some of the larger data set owners now about, as I mentioned, kind of taking that IT pain away from them and hosting some of this centrally. And we'll give them a service level agreement that we can assure them that their data will be that available, that reliable. So that's really a big part of what we're moving towards. So we'll always have a distributed network of services, and I think that's a good thing, in many regards. Some agencies are really, really good at this. NOAA, USGS, parts of EPA, that make most of their data available through high-performing web services. Other agencies, they have trouble with it, they're under-resourced to do it, and we think that there's an opportunity in terms of shared infrastructure to really help them in that regard. So this is a big part of our work going forward. Another big part of our work going forward, so I'd say that's half of the story. How is it that we make more of this data available, make more of it widely accessible? The other thing that we really want to focus on, I mentioned at the beginning that we've come to the recognition or the realization that a lot of the metadata we have is not really current with the web. It's metadata for people to download and read. It's not metadata for machines to crawl and understand what it is they can do with this data. We are moving towards a model, instead of using data.gov as our search provider, where we are a federated partner with data.gov. So we're going to be harvesting the data.gov catalog. For those federal employees in the room or contractors who publish metadata records to data.gov, we're not going to change that. That's the policy requirement. That's how metadata moves in the federal government. We'll continue to do that, but we think we can do more with that metadata from a search experience if we start to build our own registry of this content and start to keep track of how people use this metadata, start to keep track of how people add data sets to maps, how people share these things with each other, and to link to other semantic registries. So DBpedia, all these other things that are out there that have also evolved as this project has gone on, and start to do semantic search around objects that are in geoplatform.gov. So this is a big part of what we're working on right now. And we have a prototype system that's actually up and running using the records from data.gov, where a user in the map authoring interface that I showed earlier is prompted for a little bit of extra information. So in addition to the metadata record that they've created, they're walked through a quick little wizard to type in as much as they'd like to, information to share about the map. We then build knowledge graphs around everything that's in the site, all the maps, all the layers, and other things that are available, and we can exploit that with tools that allow people to do searches like this. Show me all the maps that are like this one. Suggest a data layer for this map. These tools can go out and say which maps are semantically similar to this one. This map is of the Karner blue butterfly, which, because that's a well-grounded and well-understood term, we can go out to DBpedia and understand that's an endangered species. Maybe they're interested in other maps of endangered species. The layers, I think, are even more interesting, where you can be, in the prototype software that we're working on, you can be working on a map and the software can just say, hey, other users who have made a map that's somewhat like this one have added this layer. Are you interested? Yes or no? So to start to really help people in accessing all of this content instead of these simple keyword-driven searches is a big part of where we're going. And then lastly, we are working on greatly expanding our shared hosting offering. So I mentioned kind of the primary type of hosting that I've talked about here is geoplatform.gov will take data and make it available for the benefit of the community. One of the other things we're doing, and some of your agencies are participating in this now, is if you just want to use our team and our contract to provision your own infrastructure in our environment, you inherit the security controls and other things that we have, and then you can manage the infrastructure. Agencies can come to us, and essentially we give access to AWS infrastructure for them. So if agency users who are interested in Esri ArcGIS Server or in the OpenGeo stack, those are standard offerings now that we have in FEMA, the Corps of Engineers, the Forest Service, different bureaus of the Department of the Interior, and others are starting to take advantage of that now, where they're just using our team to get access to AWS infrastructure. And it's a series of standard offerings, so that's something we think we can do pretty well, is we've got the machine images and other things to get people up and running quickly. So we think that the geospatial platform, kind of the take-home messages here, and why I think this is an example of where open data platforms are going. It's not just about making data available, in a catalog. It's about making data available and accessible. How can I download this immediately? In the geospatial world, it's about how can I get access to a web service so I can do something with this data without leaving your site or in my own software. Finding things. So we have this huge, search problem, essentially, in a lot of these larger catalogs. We think we can do a much better job with that, and we're working on advancing that. Improving the quality and of what we have through better monitoring. These report cards, being able to tell agencies, we've monitored your services, here's what we see. That's going to become a bigger part of the story as time goes on. And then a lot of these tools for collaboration. We're just starting to see the beginning of that. And it's interesting, the map manager and how people share maps. You see it was typical, I think, on a site like this. Very slow adoption at first, and as more and more people start to get used to it and understand it, we're just at the beginning of people really starting to create and share maps using the infrastructure we've stood up. All of that will take advantage of this advanced search that we're building in the site and some of the semantic concepts into the fall. So with that, I'll close. Thanks again to Jed and the AWS team for putting this together, so I appreciate it. Yeah, we have time for a few questions if people would like. And I was told to ask people to go to the microphones if they have questions.
Are you looking at, thanks very much, great presentation.
Thank you.
Are you looking at schema on read and NoSQL technology as far as being able to get all these different federated data sets together?
Yeah, actually we have talked a little bit. So there's somebody on our team who has been developing in, I don't remember which NoSQL environment it is, but building some of the registry tools actually in that environment now. We haven't done it as much for data itself. It's more been on the metadata side so far, but yeah, we are starting to experiment. So.
Okay, the other question I had was, are you seeing any performance issues with actually getting the data? These are large data sets, sometimes petabyte, getting it into the cloud.
Not yet, but we're about to, because we're starting to talk to some of the larger data holders. Snowball and other things are of great interest to us. And we've talked to the Amazon team about how we do that. We're also very interested in Direct Connect as a department and getting access from some of our larger data holdings, like the Eros Data Center in South Dakota is a big one for the Department of the Interior. We're starting to have those conversations about how it is that we can get fatter pipes into that environment as well. Luckily, those big data sets for us, so in the geospatial world, don't change all that quickly either. So like aerial photography, we collect it once, it's an annual shot. It's a one-time problem to get it in. Landsat's a different thing, but AWS is, the Amazon team is working on that already.
Is it possible to maybe leave it where it is and then just when you need it, pull it?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what I mentioned, that if agencies are able to do that and make the service available, it's high quality, or there's a pull, there's a site that somebody can just go and mine and grab the content from every once in a while, that's no problem too. So we can accommodate that.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks again for sharing.
Sure.
So my question is with regards to what's in the catalog. You've talked about data being in the catalog,
yeah,
as well as web services.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit more about web services, the API services more so, for example, being able to send out address and being able to get, like, say, a square footage of the rooftop, right?
Great, I'm glad you asked.
Volume of liquid in a lake.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Most of the web service endpoints that are registered in data.gov and geoplatform.gov are open standard compliant web services that provide access to data. They provide map tiles, or they provide the actual vector or raster features back to the user. There's a growing number of analytical web services that are hosted in that environment as well. So some of the examples, there are tools now that are registered there where you can navigate the stream network of the National Hydrography data set as well. So do upstream and downstream navigation of that network. But it's a very small number. I think as time goes on, when I mentioned the API and some of the developer tools, that's the ecosystem that we want to create. We don't necessarily intend, nor could we, to create all of those analytical services. We can host them and popularize them so that people are adding more and more. And I think as we get more developers onto the platform and using it, a part of what we hope to get out of that is people giving back and contributing analytical web services like that. So there are a few, but I hope it grows over the next several months. Any other questions? Please.
Yeah, just like others said, thanks a lot for a great presentation.
Thank you.
I guess my question probably has more of an infrastructure
Sure.
framework. So can you talk a little bit about some of the AWS services and some of the infrastructure that you guys have implemented?
Sure.
And as you plan forward, how is what other AWS services and pieces are you guys using? For example, like S3 or how you guys have dealt with auto scaling and things like that.
You bet, yeah. So right now, I would say our Amazon infrastructure is not terribly sophisticated in terms of the cutting edge of what's available in the catalog. We do rely on the FedRAMP services that are in the Amazon catalog, so there's that lag that we have as well. But it's mostly EC2 and S3 is kind of the cornerstone of our infrastructure. We do have some things that are set to auto scale. So the servers that run, right now I think we have about 40 or 50 EC2 instances that are running the environment. Many of them are micro instances that provide just very granular little services, microservice instances that provide small services back to this larger cloud. So some of the service checkers and other things are tiny little machines. The big guts of what we're doing, though, are medium to large EC2 instances that we use to do that data hosting. A lot of that's on ArcGIS Server, the Esri software stack. So a big part of our data hosting infrastructure is just virtual machines running the Esri stack of software. Some of the things that we're really interested in as this goes forward, so RDS is going to be big for us. We really want to start to take advantage of that database instead of deploying our own database on our own machines, which is for the most part, what we're still doing today. Redshift will probably become, a part of that as well, so that we can do different presentations of some of the bigger, data sets that we have in the back end. But right now, it's mostly EC2 and S3 that we're using. Any other questions? Well, thanks very much for your time, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of the meeting.